That's done. Back. Learning how to use all this stuff in real time. All right. So let me go back here and I will make you host again.
Mhm.
All right.
Should I start right away?
Um, yeah, we can go ahead and get started. So, welcome everybody. This is the second session in this room. We have the famous Mr. Tom BetGeorge. Tom, I am going to let you introduce yourself for a couple of minutes because I think you could do a better job than I can. So, welcome and thank you for participating in this.
Of
Appreciate it.
course. No problem. Let me share my screen real quick so you can see. Share desktop too, and then share computer sound. I always forget about that. Um, Let me know when is it working. Carl, can you confirm that it's working or anything before I spend like an hour talking? Carl, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, it's good. I can't unmute myself. Your host.
Okay, so but you can hear me and you can see my screen.
Absolutely.
Uh,
We're
okay,
good.
great. All right, good. I'm gonna move forward then. Okay. Um, Let me start the slideshow. All right. For some reason, it just messed up my logo. Once I saved the document, it don't really matter. This isn't music theory. This is video. Ha, wrong slideshow. Here we go. There we go. Film your display. One more time. All right, here we go. Um, I'm going to go over basically just how to get the best video possible for your display. I'm going to go over the techniques that I use. I apologize if some of this is too basic. I'm assuming that the people watching don't know too much about video cameras in general and video settings. So I'm going to try to break it down the best I can with that knowledge. Let me go ahead and just give you a short bio. My name is Tom. Okay. Um, and oh yeah, by the way, I was going to actually um, spend more time preparing for this, but I thought it'd be better instead if I just prepared making like a soundboard available. That way, when I tell jokes, like you can actually like feel some laughter, like in the room. Um, thank you. I appreciate that too. I thought that'd be more helpful. Um, I kind of went over the class topics already. Basically, I'm going to go over camera techniques for just recording display. I'm also going to talk about how to edit your video when you're done too. I'm going to use Final Cut Pro, but you don't need to have that specific editor. There's lots of editors out there. I'm just good with Final Cut Pro. That's why I'll be showing it. Okay. Quick philosophy as we go over it. If you have good content plus a good recording, um, plus good editing, you're going to have a good video. There's no way of getting around that. You really need good content, a good recording, and good editing. You skip any one of those, it's not going to be good. It's the good rule. Another good rule is if you feel like it's good enough, it's not. That's your sign. Every time you feel like something's good enough, you know it's not. Okay, stop what you're doing and just fix what's bothering you. Basically, fix it immediately because by the time you get around to it, by the time you get around like justifying why you shouldn't have done it, you could have already fixed it. Okay. First off, some camera options. Of course, there's the old school camcorder, right, which is the most common in the past, but it's actually the least common today. Um, Most camcorders, especially on like the consumer side, the lens aren't usually detachable. And the broadcast side, or professional side, of course, they are. But those can be like $60,000 to $100,000 bodies is not out of the ordinary with like a $30,000 lens. So you can easily hit $100,000 and plus very, very quickly. Um, let's go ahead and see here. So what probably most of you think of today, and it's what I use myself, is DLSR, or actually sometimes a mirrorless DLSR. Technically stands for, if I'm not mistaken, something like a single lens reflex, where there's a mirror inside. The camera I use does not have a mirror. Let me loosen this up. So I'm going to try to be practical with you, and I can't see myself. Lucky me. This is what the inside of a mirrorless is. Basically, that's what you're looking at. That's the sensor. I mean, technically, I shouldn't be exposing this too long because getting dust in there is a huge pain in the butt. But basically, that sensor is what captures all your video. I'm going to try not to get ahead of myself, but I'm going to talk about why resolution is not as important as you think. Remind me to bring that up in case I forget later. Back to the slideshow. Obviously HD is, high definition, which generally means 1080p, 1000 lines of horizontal resolution. And now, of course, there's 4K, which is 4 times that resolution or 4 times that pixels overall. And now there's even 8K out there. Don't worry about it too much. You definitely don't need 8K. 4K is cool, and I'll talk about that later. The lens, by the way, is just as critical as the body. So in other words, don't just buy a good camera if you're going to buy a camera and think that the lens is secondary. The lens is everything. Sometimes the lens, if anything, is more important than the body of the camera. We'll talk about lenses. There is a prime lens. A prime lens, by the way, just means that it doesn't zoom. So here is one of my prime lenses. This is a 50 millimeter. I'll talk about what that does later. Okay, this is a Sony Zeiss. These are pretty cool. They have really good glass. There's a zoom lens, which is probably what you think of when you think of most cameras. The zoom lens actually allows you to adjust your focal length, so it zooms. And of course, not of course, but there's also wide angle lenses. A wide angle lens, I got one over here. It might look something like that. Sometimes it actually looks a little fish eye. And when you have it totally zoomed out, it will literally skew the outsides of it. Those are fantastic when you need to be close to something. And you want to get a really wide view. But like I said, if you open it up like all the way to, let's say, 18 millimeters, and I'll talk more about that later too, it'll actually skew the sides, which is good and bad, right? It's almost like when you go to a funny, like a mirror, what are they called? Like those little carnival mirrors where like it skews your body. That's what it'll do on the side. So you got to be careful when you use wide angle lenses. Typically like 35 to 50 millimeters is super typical for focal lengths. You can use your smartphone, truth be told. If you're doing something professionally, yes, you should buy obviously professional equipment. But that being said, smartphone cameras are way better than they used to be. And here's a couple of really fantastic ones. The iPhone 11s have phenomenal cameras. The Galaxy S20 actually has 8K. That's good and bad, by the way. The resolution's phenomenal, but usually what happens is it suffers in low light. Usually, not always. I'll just address that right now. So the camera I use, and I get this question a lot because people see the video and they think, oh, if I have that camera, I can make that video, which is partially true. That being said, I use a Sony A7S Mark II. I believe they have a Mark III now, which is better. If you don't need a low light camera, don't get my camera. But if you want a low light camera, the Sony A7S, the S is critical, by the way, because if you get the R, it's better for day, but not for night. It's phenomenal for low light video recording. But here's the trade-off. One of the things they do is, remember when I open that sensor, is by having the pixels larger in the sensor, it can absorb more light. When you have a higher resolution sometimes, there's a trade-off where there's less light being absorbed. My camera actually doesn't have the highest megapixel of cameras out there, but the sensors are physically bigger. The pixels are physically bigger. They actually let in more light. So don't think 8K automatically means better for low light. It doesn't mean it's automatically bad either. But sometimes you get these really great resolutions in the day, but at nighttime it really suffers. Sony's usually phenomenal for low light in general, by the way. Also, the Google Pixel 4. Basically, any brand new smartphone um, is going to be pretty dang good, especially with color saturation. Um, and we're going to get into that in post production. So, just to give you an example of what the focal lengths actually translate to, um, this is basically the same shot with different focal lengths, different zoom is another is an easier way of describing it, but not exactly the same. Obviously, the higher the number for the millimeters is basically you're zooming in. You can see the 300 millimeter. You can see that barn like it's like right in front of you. But when you look at the 18 millimeter, you can't even tell which barn that is. It's I believe the left one. Yes. So it's super hard, right? Typically, people use like a 35 is nice, well-rounded, but that means you also, if you use a prime lens and it doesn't zoom, you physically have to get closer. I know I'm stating the obvious, but prime lenses generally have another fantastic thing about them is that they can have. Did I even talk about this? Oh, I didn't. Oh, I better talk about it now. Um, Better aperture. So aperture is something that is sometimes counterintuitive to explain because the numbers aren't are what's the word inverted. So this lens, which is one of my favorite lenses in the world, is a 35 millimeter prime lens, which means it does not zoom. It's always going to be the same focal length. But the aperture goes down to what they call an f-stop of 1.4. If you're familiar with f-stops, you would know that 1.4 is fantastic. So I lied. I can see 3 slides from now. I actually do talk about it. So I'm going to go to the slides. Wasn't that great? Yes. No, seriously, stop. Let's move on. So obviously your editing gear, you need a computer. Most computers are okay for HD recording. If you go into 4K, it takes a completely different beast. You need extremely fast processors, 32 gigabyte or more typically for RAM, and a very good video card. Sometimes they actually have external processors. There's companies that make external video cards you can just plug in, assuming you have a fast connection. Typically, you need a 5K monitor or bigger because if your video is 4K, you need to see everything and a little bit more. And of course, the solid state drive, so you can quickly access the video you're watching and editing because you're moving a lot of data along. Most people don't need to do it in 4K, but one of the fantastic things about 4K, and I'll just touch this a little bit, is when you record in 4K, even if your your final product is in 1080, you can zoom in 4 times and not lose any resolution. So when you think about it, that's fantastic, right? You can zoom in like, and you're not losing any pixels. Now, obviously, if you're in 1080 when you're filming and then you zoom in post production, in other words, you're not actually doing it with a lens, you're actually reducing your resolution and getting a very choppy video. And trust me, you always want to have more resolution, more headroom to play with, because sometimes you want to pan in post production or you want to zoom in just a little bit. When you're watching a movie and all of a sudden the moment gets serious, and then as they're talking, like the camera's just slowly getting closer, right? You want to be able to do that if you want to. That was probably creepy for you guys, right? Let's go ahead and move on. So software, why is it? I'm in the wrong screen. There we go. Free software out there. DaVinci Resolve, you can download. If you have a Mac, you can have iMovie for free too, and that's fine. Honestly, you don't really need fancy software. But that being said, I'm going to be using paid software today, which is typically under $400 for Final Cut and Adobe Premiere. If you're an educator, you can get Final Cut Pro and like 4 other major apps for $199 from the Apple Store. Oh, cool. I can just see the time. I'm at 12 minutes of my slideshow so far. All right. So you might have seen this before. I think I mentioned this once to the Florida Mini. You typically, if you really want a good video, plan your shot. If you're like me, while you're even sequencing, you're probably planning where the camera is going to be at any given moment. Lately, I've been kind of lazy and just a little bit more organic, where I just put a camera in front. It's a different style. But anyway, plan your shots, actually do your recording. Then you're going to import to the computer. And then without fail, you're going to re-record it because you're going to find later that everything was out of focus and you were too cold to adjust it. After that, you're going to re-import it back into the computer. You'll do your initial color grading or editing. After that, most likely you'll probably be crying in a fetal position from crippling self-doubt when you realize you're probably the wrong person to do this in the first place. Then, of course, you do your final editing. You share it on social media. Once you share it on social media, you get past any copyright infringement issues. You'll probably have extreme rage from that one guy who doesn't like anything you do and gives you a thumbs down. And then after you get your $1.13 from YouTube, you can celebrate and feel like you are on top of the world. When you're planning your shots, in generally, it's good to be as close as possible while getting everything in one shot, just for, of course, for clarity. If you go from a distance, that's great. It's a great like finishing shot or a starting shot, but I wouldn't make that be your general shot. It's just less exciting. It's funny, like I've worked with a lot of people who have these massive displays, but if it's almost impossible to get a great video because when it translates to video, as you know, I mean, you might have like 10 acres of lights, but it's not impossible. It's more difficult to get an overwhelming feel. I mean, you can see a lot of the most popular videos out there online are almost never large displays. They're actually smaller displays where you can get zoomed in. So less is more in a lot of ways, because then you can really capture the intimacy of being in front of it and you can capture the size. Sometimes when you say like you have like 100-foot tree, you can't capture that on video. There's no way to really show that kind of reference to see how big something is. You want to do your close-ups of important or featured elements if you're trying to guide the viewer into what they should look up. And then if you're going to do moving shots, I haven't really done that much except for a couple of drone shots. Please use a gimbal. Please use something that's going to stabilize it. You can use drones, and I use them occasionally myself, but please keep in mind, unless you buy the most expensive drone out there, you're probably going to not have anything near what a regular camera is going to be able to do. And even a $2,000-$3,000 drone is not necessarily anywhere on the same ballpark as well. Drones are mostly made for day shots. They have great cameras if you're in the day, but if you're trying to do a night shot, they just don't have, I mean, they have to save weight, right? So their sensors are physically small. The smaller the sensor, the less light it's going to let in. It's just, simple math, really. The best drones, of course, the biggest, largest ones, you can literally mount whatever camera you want to them, but that's just super overkill. But then again, everything that we do is pretty much overkill in this hobby. So you can do crowd shots if you have a crowd while you're filming, which always adds excitement, but I'm going to move on, okay? And I'm going to actually get into the nitty gritty. So as far as your camera settings, we talked about Aperture just a little bit. So Aperture is the reverse of what you think. The lower the number, the more open it is, the more light it lets in. Now, I probably should have had a chart for this one, so I apologize. But I'm going to see if I can explain this right now. The lower the number, it's like you'll actually see the lens opening up and getting larger, kind of like your eyes dilating, right? So lower number is more light. But there is a trade-off with this. More light is fantastic, by the way, and people use this all the time for portraits. And the reason why they do this is because it makes the depth of field more shallow. What that means is you're only going to see a little bit of the image or video in focus, and everything else is going to be blurred out. Actually, I think I do have a picture. Yeah, I'm smart. Okay. If you look on the pictures on the slideshow, you see F22. It's a very high number, by the way, extremely high number. There's probably great light in this picture to be able to have an aperture that high or that low, depending how you're looking at it. To have your f-stop that high. Aperture is measured in f-stop. F22 basically means everything's going to be in focus. Now, the opposite of it is going to be the lower the number. See F1.8 in the bottom right. You can see how the lens in front and obviously that lens in back is out of focus. Now, that's when you see like, your glamour shots. You see like the person totally in focus, which is a really cool look. And then the background's blurred. By the way, be careful. Like sometimes companies like phone companies like Apple, right? You can have a portrait mode on your camera, but it's faking it. All it's really doing is in post in the built-in software, which is it's a cool effect. Don't get me wrong. It's actually artificially trying to create a shallow depth of field. And you'll notice if you ever take a picture with an Apple iPhone or any other company that does that, you'll see the background and you realize inconsistencies of what really was in the same depth of field. So don't depend on that. That doesn't work. Okay. If you want to do that, you could always do that in post-production. So be careful. Like I can't film a display in 1.8. The light would be fantastic, but the truth is it would be so shallow, it would only get what's immediately in front of you. Of course, if that's the effect you're going for, do it. But if you're trying to get like your whole display or a few props at once, you're going to want to get probably around a 4 to an 8 in general. Again, please don't use these numbers as go-tos for sure, because you really got to experiment and based on your particular circumstance and how far you are from the object, how far those objects are from other objects you want in focus. Just mess with it, knowing that. But of course, the higher the f-stop, which means the smaller of the aperture, you're getting less light, which means if you're on less expensive equipment, you're going to have a problem trying to compensate. Now, the way cameras compensate is something called ISO, and basically ISO, I don't remember the actual what it actually stands for, but it's light sensitivity. Okay, so the higher is brighter, but generally it's noisier. So noisy you might think of it as pixelated or grainy, when like you see like a low light video and you see dots everywhere, right? That's noise, that's grain. The reason why I bought the Sony in particular is because it has the most phenomenal ISO of a camera that I've ever seen. Typically a camera, like a really nice camera, will have like an ISO that goes 20 to 40,000. You wouldn't want to use that because when you get up that high, it's super grainy. But if you're at like 3000 ISO, there's no grain, and that's fantastic. Like I used to use a Canon, what is it? You probably know which one I'm talking about, but Mark something, but they're like fantastic cameras. When I found the Sony though, the Sony goes up to over 400,000 ISO. If you're familiar with cameras, that's like mind-boggling. I would never go that high because it would just be whenever you're at your camera's limits, there's going to be grain, right? But you can go up to like 30,000, which is phenomenally sensitive to light with almost no grain. This camera's been known for going into near full darkness, basically just going off the stars, and then raising the ISO all the way up and making it look like it's the middle of the day. It's quite the cool effect. You might have seen things about white balance. As long as you're consistent in your video recording, you can always edit your white balance in post. You can actually edit your white balance in post no matter what, even if your white balance was inconsistent. It just means less editing later. So generally set your white balance. Your camera will probably have settings where you're going to have like a fluorescent, cloudy, and try to ideally emulate what it looks like in real life. And then in post-production, you can always fine tune it. By the way, post-production, I think you guys know it means when you're done filming, when you're actually in the editing process. So yeah, like I said, find the best setting and keep it for all the shots. File types, there's different kinds. I usually record in 4K at 60 frames per second. My display is pretty quick. And what I mean by that is all the effects I use are pretty fast moving. So I do film at 60 frames per second. Truth be told, our hardware, if you're using like Falcons and typical pixels and X-Lights, you're probably limited to 40 frames per second. Some of the shows I've done, we use different hardware and different software. They can go much higher, up to 120 frames per second. But I think this gets recorded, so I can't talk about those. Don't use continuous autofocus. Oh my gosh, I'm sure you've learned this the hard way. Your camera will not know what you're trying to focus on. So set your focus manually. And then when you set your focus manually, you'll probably have a setting on your camera that allows you to zoom in. So zoom in as much as you can. Make sure the most important things are perfectly in focus, and then your depth of field is wide enough or big enough that it's going to capture everything. Otherwise, I mean, you don't know how many times I had to re-record because I accidentally turned on autofocus just to get the initial focus in. And then every single time something turned off and on, the focus changed and it got blurry and it was just terrible. So I'm gonna do this in Final Cut, But start with your main shot, your most important shot, and then if you're going to do different scenes, try to change the scene every 2 to 7 seconds. I know light enthusiasts like longer shots um, because they just want to see everything, but the average person has a very short attention span. You've probably heard other talks they've done where typically it's been rated that our attention span is about 7 seconds. So when you go longer than 7 seconds of anything, typically people get bored and they don't even watch. I think after 7 seconds of this talk, I think most of the people already left. I don't think anyone's watching. I just feel good when I do things like this. It makes me feel like I'm not alone in this. Sorry about that. No, but I mean, I'm sure like you guys, it kind of gets kind of depressing when you're by yourself. And thank you. Anyways, moving on. So the timing should make sense musically as far as like when you cut in and out as well. Okay. When you're color grading, when you say that, the most common things that we're going to do in color grading, oh, sorry, I went too far, is adjusting the light. In other words, like your exposure, the hue, and often saturation. Sometimes I oversaturate a little bit just to add a little bit more impact. On top of that, if you're using actually not if you're using most cameras when you're recording light, they do lose some saturation. What ends up happening is the light overwhelms the camera lens, and then the first thing to go is the color. Cell phones are fantastic for color saturation. In fact, I usually get a better video for color on my iPhone than I do on my Pro Gear. Now, part of that is because I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm doing. And part of that is because the camera is always just, the software is just quite brilliant and basically finding the most perfect setting to absorb color. But the bad thing about it is, and yes, I can do it with my camera equipment, but I'm basically taking away so much of the impact. If you can get better color the less sensitive it is to light because it's going to be less likely to get overwhelmed by the light. But the bad thing about it is when you're in person and you watch a light show, there's this little bit of overwhelming emotion that goes on. And it's great to be able to capture that, right? Almost when it gets too bright, like you blur. I usually add a little bit of that because if you don't have that, it just looks like you're watching something very dim. I'm sure you've seen a lot of YouTube videos, or you might have made your own videos where the color looks great, right? But you're watching it and just has zero impact. It's because it's probably like it's too good, right? You almost want to add a little of that blur, a little bit of that like, whoa, it's blinding, right? It makes the people who are watching via their cell phone or other media devices kind of recapture that emotion that happens that when you're in front of the actual display itself. Okay. Let me go to final editing. Final editing is where you do your last adjustments, crop, trim, Ken Burns. I'll show you what that means in Final Cut. Add your fades as appropriate, add titles, blah, blah, blah. No one cares. Send the draft to someone you trust. Someone's actually going to tell you that you suck and you're a terrible person and you should quit and probably find a new career. Those are the people you want in your life, the people who actually give you honesty, not the people who just say, oh, wow, you have a light show. That's great. That's not really helpful. Okay. Let's see here. That's not really even important. This is only if you want popular videos, something catchy, blah blah blah. Facebook. By the way, it's weird. YouTube is much more forgiving than Facebook. Facebook, Facebook in general has a bad relationship with a lot of companies and artists because they're trying to make all the money and not try to share properly. YouTube's a lot better about it. So songs you can put on YouTube and not have a problem because YouTube is paying the artist. Facebook is more difficult to work with, as you probably know. And a lot of artists just won't even allow their audio to be on Facebook, period. That's why you can add a song to YouTube, and then you go to Facebook, and not only what it will say there's infringement or there's a copyright issue, they won't even allow you to put it up. It'll be immediately removed. That is Facebook for you. So if you have an audio, I usually like to test my audio by uploading it to figure it out. Like recently, for example, I did a sequence on a song called Take On Me from the 80s, right? They won't even allow it on Facebook. The audio is not allowed to be used, period. So if you put it on there, you can't even fight it. Even if I got permission from the artist, it would be extremely difficult to prove to Facebook that I actually have that. On YouTube is completely different. YouTube, they'll let you use it. They'll pay the artist. So it's much better for that. So be careful about that. You'll probably run into that. I think Vimeo is pretty forgiving. I just never got around to using Vimeo. Yeah, use a cool thumbnail, blah, blah. That's my email, by the way. Sorry, that's my email, by the way. I'm going to go into Final Cut in a second. So that way you can actually see what the post-production aspect is like. That's my email, tom@magicallightshows.com. Oh, by the way, if you like sequences, or if you like my sequences, you can get them at magicallightshows.com. Here's the required PowerPoint I have to show you, because that's what they told me. Let me go ahead and get out of this, and let's see here. Let me open up Final Cut Pro. Okay. So I'm going to move this over to this screen, make sure it's a good size. Okay, no, hold on. Let me adjust it on. I have first world problems with all these screens. I'm trying to, there we go. Make this a little bit bigger. Okay. This is Final Cut Pro. The two most common software platforms for professional editing outside of like legit blockbuster editing where they have insanely expensive hardware is Final Cut Pro, which is Macintosh only, if I'm not mistaken, Adobe Premiere, which is multi-platform, possibly even more powerful. But Adobe Premiere, like they make you do the whole monthly thing. It's almost impossible, if I'm not mistaken, to actually buy it anymore, as a lot of software companies are doing. I like to buy software and then not have to buy it again until necessary. Like I said, I bought Final Cut as an educator for $199 along with what's that? Logic Pro and 3 other fantastic programs that I never use. But these 2 I do all the time. So this is a little bit what an editor looks like. Even in iMovie and other video editors, you probably have similar things. So one of the most important things is to actually do some post-production editing. Now, I'm not going to play the video too much. If you want to watch videos of mine and you want to see, not in an egotistical way, how I generally do things, feel free. My name is Tom BetGeorge. If you Google that, or if you go on YouTube and type my name, you'll probably find the channel. And you can watch these at full speed. I can't show you at full speed, but you can see when I'm moving it real slow along. It's really, I really like this video for how clear it came out. But what I'm going to talk to you about is, for example, like post-production editing. Now, this is just one single shot. I did this to be more dramatic. Lie, I was cold and lazy, but it works. So when I click it, and I go to, let's say, color, for example, you can see my exposure I didn't touch. I had fantastic, sorry, that sounds like I'm boasting. So, I'm so great. No, I had really great exposure so I didn't have to do any post-production on that. But saturation, I did lose. So I actually, on my brights, I put like a mass amount of extra saturation. Let me show you what it looks like. I can't believe I'm showing you without my makeup, what it looks like. Okay. Sorry. Now, it's not dramatically different, right? But it did lose, like, now, it's still, the video quality is fantastic as far as like the clarity is there. If you were where I am and you saw the video, you would see like, wow, this is really clear. But you can see like the green isn't super green, right? And it happens a lot with red. Different colors respond differently because of their wavelengths. Red is a larger wavelength than let's say blue or green. Let me go to, okay, red, look, it looks almost like pink orangey, right? But if I go to, obviously, if I go to my shadows, and most good software will let you play with your saturation and adjust where on the saturation line you're going to do it. If I raise the saturation of my shadows, it's going to make even the street and other things really bright. It's pretty cool looking, don't get me wrong. But if you have anything else that's lit up, it's going to make that really, saturated too, which is not really what it looks like in real life. And ideally, when you do recordings, assuming that you have, remember, good content, you're just trying to show an accurate depiction of what that content was like. I mean, unless like, you're filming like celebrities like that, maybe not be really pretty like in real life, up close and stuff. I don't even know why I colors are more appropriate. A little distorted too. But if I go ahead and take my mids, you can see what colors. Not too bad. I'll probably leave that like about halfway. And this is very subjective, so everyone's going to have a different opinion on what looks best. It's not really better or worse. It's just that mine is better. But if you go to your highlights, I usually have the most brightest things are where the saturation's lost the most. And it makes sense when you think about it, right? And of course, when you're filming light, the light is the focus in our video. So usually most people editing videos they're not touching the brightest stuff. Oh, whoops. I guess because I'm rendering stuff and I have to, I got a hard drive full. I use SSDs for everything. So the advantage is they're fast, but of course they're generally like smaller. Anyways, moving back to what I'm doing. Anyways, yeah. So you can see when you adjust the saturation on the brightest things, which is light, you get a really much more realistic of what it looks like in person. So right now it's rendering. You can see these little dots on top. That means my computer is thinking. It's actually rendering it. If I go to the very beginning and I don't touch anything for a while, you'll see those dots move. It's like watching paint dry, apparently. Maybe because I'm also in Zoom and I'm doing other things and I'm watching like 16 other videos. I'm watching all the other classes in the corner of my eye because I thought my class would suck. So just to keep, me focused or more happy, I'm watching other classes too. Let's go ahead and do other things too. So we talked about what color saturation does in post-production. I mentioned to you casually about how you say in English. Oh yes, Ken Burns. Okay. So if I cut my video here, let me just cut this right there, razor blade. And I select this clip. Now, if I click here, which is going to be different every software program, so sorry, but if you're in Final Cut, I can go to, let's say, crop. And when I go there, I have to actually bring my time cursor over it. And you can trim it, crop it, right? Like change your focus. Ken Burns is a very famous effect and photographer, or videographer, whatever, where you start in one place and then you end at another, but it's all in post-production. So in other words, this isn't an effect that you're necessarily doing. You can do this in real life in real time, but the problem is if you don't do it perfectly, you can't go back, right? But if you, let's say you record in 4K at a larger resolution than you need, you can move around your film in post-production. Like, so for example, in this green, it's going to start here, and then the red is going to end there. In other words, it's going to start closer and it's going to zoom out. Let me show you what that looks like, okay? I'm sorry, it's going to be crappy. So as you can see, like the resolution's bad. It's also like jittery because you're watching Zoom and stuff, right? But hopefully you saw that. Let me do something a little more dramatic just so you can really get what the idea is like. So let me start from the left side, and then I'm going to zoom out overall, okay? Let me move this just a little bit there, and then you can watch what that looks like now. Now, this is, of course, post-production. So if you zoom in too much in post-production and you don't actually have resolution to start with, it's going to look like crap. This is assuming you have some headroom to play with. So you can see you can do cool things. But the bad thing about this, too, is there's a balance, right? If you're doing this to make a cool production, do everything you want. If you're doing this because you're trying to get a lot of views, which I know people talk about, I don't do it for the fame, whatever. I'm not going to address all that, okay? But if you're trying to have a large impact and a large audience, if you overdo your production, it comes across as overproduced, and people kind of lose that authenticity, which I know is a loaded word, right? But the thing is, people, what make things popular on the internet, it constantly evolves. And at the moment, in general, I believe most videos that do really, really well are videos that people feel like someone just happened to hit record on a camera and, oh my gosh, look at this wonderful thing that I just happened to be in front of, right? because they feel like that's more organic, and there's something to that versus like I'm going to overproduce this, make it like so cool. If you go too far with that, ironically, even though your video quality and maybe cinematographers might be like, hey, that was actually some pretty good techniques you're using there. It often doesn't get better views because then it comes across as overproduced, and um, people generally don't like being told what they should watch. They feel kind of cool when they're watching something. They feel like, oh my gosh, look at my friend Billy recorded this. Isn't this really, really neat? It just feels more grassroots, and people like grassroots for whatever reason. So be careful about overproduction. When you like overuse Ken Burns, I sometimes use it like on projects where I'm trying to like convey just a little bit more emotion through it, especially if I think it could assist in that. I recently made like a summary of some videos that I did this last year. Um, I don't know, is that commercial product? I don't know. Is that it? That might be it. Oh, okay, yeah. So I might do like when I think I went to Stranger Things, I did a little bit of motion. Oh, that's my old video. My bad. I don't know what the new one is. But let me just do it right now. I need some motion, right? So I'm going to start. I don't like starting big. I'd rather do the opposite. I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to start and I'm going to zoom out. So let's see what it looks like. By the way, it's too long for the average person. You're just watching a quick summary. I'm going to shorten that beginning. Let's just start there, for example. Now, when I'm watching this right now, I know what it looked like and it should look like. It's kind of too orangey. So let me go ahead and click this video right here. Let me go to color, and I am going to change the color. Now, there's all different things, ways of doing this, okay? And there's different philosophies about if you're going to add something, you're going to take something away that you don't like. In general, when you take something away you don't like, it's usually more effective and more efficient and less likely to have grain and other artifacts in the video, okay? Let me see how well I'm doing on time. 10:13. I have 7 more minutes before I'm going to open up to questions. So I'm going to, let's see here. Now, I'm just going to take my master for now, which is not necessarily how I would normally do this. There's different ways. So I'm going to add more red. Now, obviously, when I take my master and I add red to everything, even the black became red, which is not good, right? Let me put that back to 0%. So that way it's not affecting anything. So realistically, it's my bright things, what are highlights, which is being most affected. I'm going to go and add more red. Now, look, now it's obviously more red. But it might be too far because now it's going to make everything red. But so you can play with things, right? Or another way of looking at it, instead of making more red, I think the opposite of red is green. Yeah, see what happens when I take green and I lower it. These are when you're lowering. So when I lower red, obviously it looks like that. I don't know why I said obviously, that's stupid. But when I take away these colors here, around here, I'm starting to get more of the red I'm looking for right now. I'm going way too far. You would never do that much editing, right? But you can see how that's the original. And now I brought some of that red back. So ideally, again, assuming that your video was actually good from the get-go, you're just going to mess around a little bit with the color to make it more accurate, depending on variable settings within your camera. Let me also mess a little bit with exposure to give you an idea what that looks like. So when I go to exposure, if I raise the lights, it's going to get like, wow, like, oh my gosh, it's so bright, right? Now that's a little bit too much. I'm totally faking it, right? It wasn't that powerful, right? But I could add a little bit if I wanted to make it feel like the glow was more impactful. If I raise the shadows, it's perfect. Yes. Let me bring that back just a little bit, right? You can even add, if you have too much shadow in there, let's say you start like there, you can always take it and drop it, and you can get even more contrasting video like that. Now, again, be careful, because if you overproduce, you lose your value, right? And the more you do this post-production, generally your quality goes down, and you can kind of mess with these, get a certain feel. Generally, whatever you think you should do, taper back a little bit, because we tend to go too far and then we start to lose objectivity. So if you're thinking you need 25%, maybe taper down just a little bit, down to 20, 15, or -40. Let me go to other things. So we talked about Now, I don't think I have to talk to you about like, fades and stuff like that. Like, I can add, for example, cross dissolve, which is the most common fade, right? So basically I'll just drag it and then it won't listen to me. There it is. Okay. And then it's going to leave one thing and enter another. But that's not really, I mean, I think it's common sense. You saw that if I do this over here. Sorry for the Zoom connection. It's probably bad. I'm leeching off my neighbor because I'm too cheap to buy internet. Just kidding. So, anyways, I hope that helped you with that. Let me see if there's any other shots that might need some general. Like, look at that. That's terrible, right? That's green. In person, that looks so cool. So I'm going to take my saturation, take my highlights, increase it a little bit. Oh, that didn't work, did it? So it looks like I lost some of my color there. Let's go to color. And let's take my highlights and let's find. So kind of not the best video, or maybe it's supposed to be kind of minty green. Could be part of the experiment, part of the show. There's a shader, I remember that. Let me tell you something. Bustin' makes me feel good. So, you can again obviously be careful. Like make sure you look at different parts, so you're not just looking at one scene and seeing how it affects. You have to add the color saturation so it's proper. So color grading like this, you got to be careful because it's not just one shot, unless you're actually cutting up the shots individually and you're actually editing those as well. Sometimes you just get like really cool shots. Like I like this shot right here. It's kind of a close up. It kind of captures the light. I like it, I think, because I did not film it. It was a video crew in Germany that filmed that one shot. This shot's pretty cool. I'll talk just a second about moving heads. I don't know why my color looks so weird like that. It looks like it got some greens in there. That was probably my white balance, which is weird because even the pixels are truly white, but just that had enough in there to make it look green. It also could be because this is shortly after California allowed weed to be smoked, so maybe that's just all the haze from that in the air. When you look at moving heads, that's one of the most difficult thing. And then I'm going to talk a little about moving heads, and David Spalding is going to do some fantastic presentations on that. Moving heads are complicated, right? Because it's hard to capture the beams. You can see them with your eyes, but sometimes cameras are hard to pick them up. You really want sensitivity. You can actually see, in all seriousness, let me zoom in. Zoom. I hit play. If I look at these, oh, there it is. Okay. If you look over here, see that inconsistency? That's actually some type of pollution in the air. All kidding aside. This is winter, and often when it gets cold, truth be told, I don't know why I said truth be told. Do I even think before I say some of these things I say? Guys, we're running out of time. We're running out of time. I'm just going to continue. In the winter, people are using their fireplaces, and that smoke is actually from the fireplaces. That makes it a little bit better, but it also makes it inconsistent. So don't think the secret is, oh, wait till it's so cold that if it's inconsistent, it looks worse. It's better to have no smoke or a lot of smoke, but not in between. This is probably just enough that you can see that inconsistency. I'm like, oh, there's actually pollutants in the air. Now, truth be told, also, if there's nothing in the air, you won't be able to see the beam regardless, because light needs something to reflect off of. But you'd be surprised how much is in the air. Even if you think there's not, there's often is. So I think I kind of went over the gist of how to make what I believe to make an impactful display. Again, going back to the philosophy, you need good content plus a good recording plus good editing, or sometimes even no editing if the first two were so fantastic, and then you get a good video. If not all of them are good, you can't, I hate the phrase, but you can't polish a turd, right? If it's not already good in every aspect, your final product won't be good. Anyways, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up to questions. My understanding is I should be talking 50 minutes, which I just hit the 50-minute mark. So let me see what I need to do. Let me go to Zoom.
I've gone ahead and reclaimed. Hang on, let me turn this up.
Okay,
I've
cool.
gone ahead and reclaimed the host, Tom.
Perfect. Okay.
And so what I'm going to do here is, do you have the chat open? because all the questions are in chat. There's a lot in
Oh,
there.
they are. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yep. No, that's okay.
Yeah, I was watching My Little Pony went to Netflix. I've been watching it the whole time too. Let's see here. Where is chat? It's my first time using technology today.
If you go to the ribbon, there should be a chat
Maybe I'll stop sharing. Maybe
icon.
there we go. Now I can
There
see it.
you are.
All right, cool. So should I look at all of them, or
I'd
do you know?
start it. Yeah, I just go ahead and run through them. Start around 12:30, and you'll start
Sure.
seeing them.
Okay. Actually, I don't see timestamps on my software. My
Oh,
apologies.
okay. All right. So we'll just kind of run through these then. Let's see. Jason made a comment.
I can go backwards.
Let's see.
Any way to configure a GoPro? I don't use GoPros because they generally don't have good low light. Generally, um, so yeah, I mean, again, like the GoPro's made for something different, right? They're made for like parkour, but they're not necessarily made for low light situations. So I would just mess with it. Yes, you can configure GoPros, but I don't know that. Oh, someone says GoPro works great for the light, so I take it back. At 1910 Ocean, please show me. I'd love to see what it does with the low light. Do you dial it back, Tom, on brightness on the display? That is. Oh yes, a great question. I often dial back my brightness. I think the most common brightness I use is 40%. I use 40% to 70%. 70% is usually what I run during the show. Not because I'm improperly doing power. I just find that it's just I like the way that 70% looks. But when when I'm filming, I do put it on 40%. If you go too low, you also lose some of your dynamics. You might know because the lower you go, you start to lose your range. I mean, if your range is from 0 to 30%, as you know, LEDs, they're not really great. They're not linear. And what I mean by that is if you put an LED on 1% brightness, you won't even see it turn on. It takes a certain amount of voltage, certain amount of power to actually even operate. Actually, I should have said current, but you know what I'm trying to say. So if it doesn't hit a certain threshold, it's not even going to turn on because your voltage doesn't change with LEDs. Otherwise, you'll destroy them. So that being said, be careful about going too low. You'll lose your complete dynamic range. So if you have like it slowly fading out and you're at 20% when you're recording, well, you got no fade. It's just like on then off. So anyways, talking too much. My video is always oversaturated. When I turn it down, I don't get enough to make the low intensity effects show. Oversaturated. Now, I think you mean oversaturated with light, I'm assuming, versus color. Now, what I would, again, you can always find a balance and then do some of it in post-production. So in other words, back off a little bit. And then add it in post-production. Just make sure you get as clear of a product during the actual editing process. By the way, I found out how to show the timestamps, Carl. It's not too many questions. I'm at 30 to 40% myself. Yep. Okay, do you clean your camera lens before shooting? Not every shot, and I should. Every once in a while I find dust, and you can probably find dust in my videos. Definitely use dust kits. Don't just grab anything, whatever, you know what I mean? Because especially when it comes to your sensor is super critical and you can damage it. So be super, super, super careful not to damage it. Use like rubbing alcohol, whatever's appropriate, by putting it onto like these little sensor cleaners. Can we open those folders in your desktop? Oh yeah, I forgot about those. Those are pretty funny. If you have a nice dark area, I would think you could go lower on the brightness of LEDs. Yeah, again, like you can go lower, but your dynamic range is lost. How do you deal with lens consideration going from inside to outside and back again in cold temps? Condensation going from inside to outside and back again in cold temps. Wow, I think usually when I film, I'm just outside the whole time freezing until I hate my life so much that I just go back inside, which is already at the very beginning. Do you recommend a good f-stop and shutter speed to start with? If I had to choose, shutter speed would be no lower than 1/60th of a frame, considering I'm doing 60 frames per second. So for those of you that's not obvious to, let me explain the logic behind that. If you're doing 60 images per second, your shutter has to be your shutter basically with opening and closing to capture the images has to be at least 60, if not really 120, right? Which gives you um, how long the shutter is open. If you have it open for too long and you're having something in motion, uh, it gets blurred. So if you have like, let's say an arch moving and you have let me exaggerate, right? Let's say your shutter speed was 110, which means like only 10 shots per second. It's going to blur. The whole arch is going to blur in a way that you don't want. But if you have 60 frames per second, I'm sorry, a shutter speed of 1/60th or above, up to 120, you're probably pretty good. Obviously, if your shutter's too fast, you're just going so fast, you're not having enough time to capture light. So again, it's complicated because every variable is dependent on another variable dependent on the equipment you're using. So if you have the Sony A7S Mark II or 3, you have a lot of power because it's so sensitive to light, you have more flexibility. But if you have something cheaper, which is totally okay, you have less flexibility. And sometimes you're forced to make some of these compromises. Someone says cool the camera in the fridge prior to bringing it outside. Oh. When is the best time of day to record? Now, there's a lot of truth that people say like dusk it is a fantastic time to record, especially if your camera settings or if your camera doesn't allow you to record other times and you have great, light. I actually have a street light right in front of my house, which is annoying as heck. I actually did figure out this past season how to turn it off with the moving heads because they recently moved the sensor. That being said, now I can do projection mapping again, so I can turn off the street light. That being said, the street light lights up my house a little bit anyway, so it doesn't affect me as much. So yes, dusk is a fantastic time. But here's the problem. It only works when you're doing one song or like you know for sure if you're having multiple shots with only one camera, you're screwed when you do dusk because there's not enough time to have that perfect time. So I do mine also for another reason in the middle of the night. I have those moving heads on top of the roof. Which lets everyone in an 8-mile radius know that my show is on every time I run it. So the problem that I have is if I run it at 6 p.m. and it's a night that I'm not supposed to have a show, they see those beams in the sky and they're like, oh, let me come see it. And then I have all these headlights in the video. And so what I do is I pay my neighbors, I pay a neighbor who knows everyone else to shut down the road and then keep everyone else out. And I record typically at like 10 p.m. Because that way, ideally, most people are like winding down. They're not looking out their window, like, wishing on a star. And that way I can get consistent shots. And also if I'm recording like 3 songs, I don't want one song to be at dusk and then the next song to be at a different time. Lately, I've been doing just a single shot because, like I said, I think there's something simple and authentic. English is my, how you say, first language.
All right. Hey, Tom, we've got to go ahead and stop. I
I
want
have
to.
to teach my other class, I think, too.
Yep. And you've got another class coming up. I want to thank you for being here and taking the time and doing something that you could do in half a day or a day and scramming it down to an hour. That's awesome. So, thank you.